Hello, VC. It's Mazzy here. If you're going to San Francisco, be sure to wear some flowers in your hair. This is a video I've been thinking about for a while, and I'm going to improvise it. But this is about San Francisco psychedelic bands of the mid to late 60s. I grew up in San Francisco. I was born on the very tip of the Haight-Ashbury on Stanion Street, overlooking Golden Gate Park, and about 3 blocks from 2400 Fulton Street, which later became the Jefferson Airplane's mansion. So I'm going to just show you some records, and my guess is most of you know almost all these records, but I'm going to kind of do my take on them from growing up during that time in San Francisco. And because of that, I'm going to switch hats. Gone is the fedora, and just for now, San Francisco Giants. I grew up again in San Francisco. I was born the year the Stratocaster guitar was invented, and I was bar mitzvahed at the end of the Summer of Love in San Francisco, which is 1967, as you all know. Not going to get into all the details of that, but when the Beatles hit in '64, my whole interest in baseball and Little League and all that changed, and I wanted to be in a rock and roll band. So I ended up starting to play the drums, and then a couple years later, I switched to guitar because my best friend was a drummer. We wanted to start a band together. So those were the days literally where you just started a band literally in a week, even if you didn't play. So put down my drumsticks, got an acoustic guitar initially, and then a really funky St. George electric guitar, and I learned 3 or 4 chords, and we had a band. We had a garage band in the San Francisco Bay Area. So I'm going to talk about these bands. You all know them. And first, I'm going to talk about the whole scene there a little bit, because even though I was on the tail end of being too young to go to the very early Fillmore shows that Bill Graham put on, but when he moved to the Fillmore West, there was a Fillmore West in the Avalon Ballroom. I actually put my name on mailing lists, and I started collecting and getting all these handbills, as you can see, of the shows at the time. You know, and literally I think I have a couple hundred of these handbills, as you can see here. It's not a definitive collection. I don't have everything, but boy, luckily I kept these, and a couple years ago look at this, these shows: Steppenwolf, Santana, Staple Singers, Grateful Dead, Preservation Hall Jazz Band, Sons of Champlin. And these are like, $2, $3 shows. Chuck Berry, Steve Miller Band, Big Brother, Albert King, just to kind of give you a little sense there. Anyway, there you go, right? So, I'm going to start out with the band. I knew of the sounds of San Francisco, but again, I was too young to go to most of these shows. But the first band a friend of mine gave me, I didn't get their first album, but a friend of mine for my bar mitzvah gave me Surrealistic Pillow. And obviously this was the breakout album of the San Francisco band. This became national hit. Somebody to Love and White Rabbit. Grace Slick had joined the band after Signe Anderson, their original lead singer from a folk rock band on Jefferson Airplane Takes Off, joined the band. She had been in another band called The Great Society with her brother Darby Slick, and brought the 2 songs that became these 2 hit singles. This song was drenched in reverb, recorded in LA, which is unfortunate. So even all the remasters of this have been that drenched in reverb sound. It's a sound that works. There's actually a mobile fidelity version that finally makes it the best version out there, I think, in my opinion. And I think that's the mono version. It's 45 RPM, which I'm not a huge fan of, but of switching records every, 3 songs or something. but it's still worth it. And great sounding record. I mean, a great record aside from that. I wish it was, there was a dry version recorded and then the reverb added later, but that's not the case. I'm just gonna show a few of these. You know these albums, but the ones in the 60s, I love all their first albums, and to me, they're my favorite of all the San Francisco bands. I don't think they get their due, but they went after having that hit top 10 album and singles. They put After Bathing at Backstreet, which is pretty out there. Still a great album. I want to say cult classic, it's beyond cult, but you know that. Oh, just forgot something. Stand by. See what happens when you don't edit these videos? I hope you had a smoke or a drink or a toke or a brew or something in that minute I went there. Anyway, Jefferson Airplane, I like all these records. They're great albums. Crown of Creation, Lather is on here, another great slick song. Triad, which was obviously written by David Crosby, and his band didn't want to do it, the Byrds, and so Jefferson Airplane did it. And he actually kind of collaborated in San Francisco for years. But it's got the House of Punio Corners, Share a Little Joke. I mean, what a great band. Not only did they have Marty Ballin and Grace Slick, these two great vocalists, they had another great songwriter and vocalist in Jorma Kaukonen and Paul Kantner, who really was kind of the driving force of the band. I'm not a huge, or not a big fan at all of Jefferson Starship, although I love that first Paul Kantner Blows Against the Empire album, which is kind of a Jefferson Starship-ish, really a solo album with everyone on it. Stunning record. And then, what I consider one of the best live albums of all time is Bless His Pun Little Head. Listen to the bass playing on this album by Jack Cassidy. Amazing record. Great live record. And there you go. That's inside 2400 Fulton, the mansion the Airplane had across from Golden Gate Park. And the last album of theirs, which I'm gonna showcase here, Volunteers. A great record, sort of closing out the 60s for a lot of reasons. You know, revolution. I think the Airplane got too political for some people, but I was able to see the Airplane. I was at Altamont, so I saw him there, but I saw him early. I saw him at Winterland several times, and then a couple times later into the 70s, which the band sort of morphed and it wasn't as interesting then. But still something, a great underrated band in my opinion. I know they have a cult following, but they're not sort of remembered and revered like a lot of other bands these days. But Jefferson Airplane, playing in the park, saw them in Golden Gate Park. That's the place to see them also. My other band that I initially liked, before even the Grateful Dead, of the Bay Area bands, they were from the East Bay, and that's Country Joe and the Fish. Electric music for the mind and body. These were produced by Sam Charters, all their records on Vanguard, who produced a lot early and found a lot of the blues makers. Google up Sam Charters and read about him a lot. But he worked with these, and they were sort of a jug band that kind of progressed into psychedelia. These two albums especially. I remember being a kid. What's fun about this album, it came with the Fish game, and I remember we'd cut it out and we'd play it. And you know, I was too young to be a stoner at that point. And but these records, they're sort of pop records in a way, pop psychedelic. On this, Not So Sweet, Martha Lorraine, and probably Porpoise Mouth. Well, actually a lot of these songs, Superbird, The Masked Marauder. Great record. But this, a stunning, beautiful song written about Janis Joplin called Janis, and that's on here. So again, I love this record. And then of course, I remember getting this album, the original, this is a reissue on Sundays. I had the original Mainstream Records, which I loved, and I had a garage band with my buddies, and we actually did two songs. We did Blind Man, and we did Caterpillar. Oh, and Light is Faster Than Sound. We did 3 songs in our garage band from this album. And then obviously after the Monterey Festival, Clive Davis signed Big Brother because of Janis Joplin to Columbia, and they put out the infamous Cheap Thrills, produced by John Simon, that I did a whole thing on John Simon about a month or so ago, a lot of video on him, who wasn't really impressed with the band, although I love that, I loved her with Big Brother, even though they're kind of a sloppy band. I loved her more than the Full Tilt Boogie Band and when she went solo. And obviously the infamous cover by R. Crumb, who got $500 to do this cover. Anyway, great, great, great album. Then we get to, I remember being homesick one day when I was a kid, and I was sick for several days, maybe it was a flu, I don't remember what. And my mother asked me if I wanted anything. And I said, can you go to the record store? There was music stores then that had instruments and records, and get this album by the Grateful Dead. You know, a mother thinking of the Grateful Dead in 1967 about names of bands, and she brought it home. She did it and brought it home. The first Grateful Dead record. Great, great record. I had heard on the San Francisco KMPX or KSN radio, the underground radio stations, The Golden Road to Unlimited Devotion, and I had heard about the Grateful Dead from, again, all these posters that I was getting, you know, from the Fillmore and the Avalon. I've seen their name. I was too young to initially see them, although I did see them, I guess 68 or 69, I saw them in Golden Gate Park as well, but the Grateful Dead. And of course, I would buy all their records, their first studio albums, you know, Anthem of the Sun. These are my original records from back in the 60s, and they still play great. Warner 7 original, I think these are the obvious original green labels. I hope, maybe not. Yep, you know, there you go. You know the labels and all that. And then of course, the record that really kind of pushed them beyond everything, their first live album, Live Dead. Because as most of you know, or most people consider them as their live thing was their big deal. I saw them a lot through the early to mid 70s. Then I kind of fell out of favor with them for a little while when the whole punk thing happened. But I saw them a lot. Saw them in 71, 72, mostly at Winterland. Went to a lot of those New Year Eve shows at the time. You all know Grateful Dead, I don't have to talk about them, but I wouldn't consider myself a Deadhead, but I probably saw them 30 times maybe, which is not by any means extensive like most Deadheads. But almost all except 2 of those shows were prior to 1975, and from 68, 69 to 73 was my primary time. Every time they'd play Winterland, I'd go to every show. The other band that I really fell in love with right off the bat from their first album, and I never saw them, unfortunately, was Moby Grape. And this is the infamous Jim Marshall photographer cover picture that they, I think, cropped out, retouched later because he's flipping off the bird there. And if you know the story, how Columbia kind of fucked them over, releasing, 4 or 5 singles at once. Anyway, Moby Grape, I still love them. This is considered one of the great San Francisco albums of 1967, of any period in the psychedelic rock and roll sound. Kind of a harder edge than a lot of the other San Francisco bands with a little country flair to it. But I kept with them, and I remember getting this album, which I loved it because it was a 2-record set. It included Wow, which is an album I really like, and to me one of my favorite record covers of the period. And it came with a second they called it a free record called Grape Jam that Mike Bloomfield and Al Cooper play on. Little trivia story about this. There was a local top 40 radio station called KFRC, and they had a contest, a lyric contest, and you'd send in a poem or a lyric, and if you won, you would be on, your song would be recorded by Moby Grape on their next record. And I entered it. I don't remember what it was. I don't think I have it anymore, but I entered that contest, and a guy named Michael Hayworth won the contest, and his piece was called The Lake. And it's the last song on here. It's actually a psychedelic. There's no music to it, really. It's psychedelic effects and tape loops and things, and to his lyrics. And I think at the very end they mentioned by Michael Hayworth. I don't know if it's his voice or one of the members of Moby Grape. A lot of people don't love this, but I think this is really a fun record. It's kind of like the equivalent of George Harrison's All Things Must Pass, the Apple Jam record. But it's kind of a cool thing, very bluesy. Again, one of my favorites. 1968, I remember going, I had heard about these bands, and I remember one of the local record stores was called Portals to Music, and they had a big display. And these records came out, it must have been, looking back on it, a Capitol Records window. And they had, it was plastered with just these two records. So I'm gonna mix bands now. And I love these two covers, obviously. Quicksilver Messenger Service. I keep saying things are my all-time favorite, but all these records, these are a part of my childhood, and I play them today continuously. I love these records. First Quicksilver Messenger Service, and the very first Steve Miller Band album. This is when Boz Scaggs was with him. He was on the first two albums. I just love this. Psychedelic cover, produced by Glyn Johns. They went to London to record it. I think he got a big advance or something. And my personal favorites, I like Steve Miller's first 5 albums. And you can't knock someone for getting popular and famous. Once Fly Like an Eagle and The Joker came out, I kind of pulled back. Looking, I play them once in a while, and they're kind of guilty pleasures, very, formula-based, but good for him. Anytime a musician finally kicks in. But it was pretty amazing that Capitol stuck with this group, and they didn't really sell a ton of records, but their first 5 records, their second album, which is amazing. Again, my original copy here, I think I wrote my name on it at the time, Maslov, on Capitol Records, live record, mostly live. Again, another great cover. What a great place to grow up in the late 60s and early 70s, but especially being a 13, 14, 15, 16-year-old and getting this music and having it out there. And you can go to Golden Gate Park, you could go to the Fillmore, the Avalon, or Winterland and see these bands for, $2, $3, $4, and 3 or 4 acts. The Grateful Dead playing 3 hours with the Jefferson Center playing, or 4 hours or something. What a great time. I was on the tail end of that. Didn't see as much as I would like to have seen, but did see a bunch of them. But again, these were some of my favorite albums of 1968. Another band around that time, we're getting into a little later. Oh, going back, the other one of Steve Miller, which was later that year. Great album. The song Quicksilver Girl is a stunner. This is actually a later import I got of the band. Dear Mary, but all great records. And again, another wonderful cover. Last album Boz Scaggs was on before he went solo. I'm not going to say underrated because, you all probably know this record, and if you don't, you should. And then another band which I liked and I did see once at the time, and they didn't really catch on in terms of the masses at all, the Sons of Champlin on Capitol Records as well, 68, 69, I believe. Cool record. Bill Champlin later finally, cashed in, made money during the schmaltzy middle-of-the-road periods of Chicago Transit Authority, or Chicago. But this was, at the time of Chicago, another band with horn section, like Chicago. A little more psychedelic, but a great record. Highly recommended. Beautiful cover. 1982A, Rooftop. Great song, Get High. That's a 7 or 8 minute little journey with vibraphones on it. Freedom, that goes on an entire side. It's a double album. It was I think it wasn't the price of a double album at the time. I think certain records, like the first couple Chicago records, were the price of one album, or maybe a little more, but you get 2 records, and I love that. Also that Taj Mahal album. Columbia did a series of albums like that were double albums, but just almost the price of one. And I think they got kids like me to buy these records just because you get 2 records for, fairly cheap. Then, of course, the band that became the biggest Bay Area band ever, and in a weird way, didn't fit in with the normal psychedelic thing, but that was Creedence Clearwater. They became, as you know, huge, so I'm not going to really get into them. one of my best friends' father took us to what was called, a lot of people don't know about this concert, this festival called the San Francisco International Pop Festival, and it took place at the Alameda Fairgrounds in the East Bay across from San Francisco. I went both days with him, my friend's dad and him, and we saw, it was 1968, October 68, and that's the first time I ever saw Creedence Clearwater. And it was amazing shows. Creedence Clearwater, Deep Purple, the Chambers Brothers, Procol Harum. So I'm 14 years old seeing all these bands for a outdoor, it was a racetrack type of location out at the fairgrounds. And you might want to Google it, or I don't have the promo with me. I still have the newspaper kind of thing they gave away with all the, I think, who else was there? I said the Chambers Brothers, I can't think who else. Now, probably the most notorious band who made the worst record that came out later than it should have was the Charlatans. Not to be confused with the Charlatans UK, later in the early 90s, late 80s, whatever it was, post-punk, pop, British pop, what do you call it? Anyway, you know what I'm talking about. This record is really not very good. They played around the San Francisco scene a lot in all the ballrooms. They also played as a residency in the Gold Country on the California-Nevada border. Famous-wise, Dan Hicks was in this band, who later started Dan Hicks and the Hot Licks, another one of my favorite, whole different style. I'm not including that, and again, this is not a definitive showcase of the San Francisco bands, but just the ones that I love. And these are albums to this day, at my elderly age, or middle elderly, or senior citizen age, I love this music, and I still play it, and it's very influential on my life, socially, artistically, creatively, musically, obviously. And then lastly, I'm just gonna put, just because these, to me, these bands were this band was playing around the time, obviously, you know Santana, they were playing around the time, they're almost like in that second generation of the initial sounds of San Francisco. Obviously, they exploded after the whole Woodstock performance with Michael Shreve on drums, where they did, we did Evil Ways, I think they did Soul Sacrifice, that was the big hit. Again, another great album cover from these poster series and things. So that's the sounds of San Francisco. I think as I close out, I'll just grab a few of these and showcase them so you can see some great posters of the San Francisco and Avalon ballrooms. Again, great memories. I'm so fortunate enough to have grown up at this time in this place. It affects how I love music, how I love this sort of San Francisco culture, the Haight-Ashbury, everything. Obviously, I moved out of San Francisco 5 years ago after a lifetime there. Like a lot of other big cities, the soul has gotten sucked out, even though it's still quite beautiful. Anyway, that's my tribute to San Francisco, late 60s bands. Enjoy it, make some comments, subscribe. If you want to see more, maybe at some point I'll concentrate on one band and go through everything. But this stuff is very personal to me. The city, the place, the timing. I was, again, a little too young, but walking around Golden Gate Park, walking up Haight Street in 67, when they'd hang out and sell the Berkeley Barb and the Oracle newspapers. It was a wild time, and just being around that was pretty amazing. Haight Street, the Print Mint, the Psychedelic Shop, the Straight Theater, that was an old movie theater that was originally called the Haight Theater, but they changed the name during that time to the Haight. Good times. It didn't last long, but good times. Mazzy out. Love you. Bye. Peace.